All right, this is the time in our Striving for Eternity Academy. Those who watch live Monday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, they get to give me something to do a transition to the gospel. From whatever they give me, I have to transition from whatever I'm given to the gospel. And I have no idea what it is yet. When my phone buzzes, I will know what I have to do a transition to. A quilt. All right, so do you think you would be able to transition, if you're in a conversation about a quilt, to the gospel? The reason we play this game is so that you can practice and learn to get better at transitioning from the natural world to the spiritual world. I don't know a whole lot about quilts other than the fact that they keep you warm. But there is one that I do remember watching a program, very interesting program in a community where they had about 20 or 30 people working on one huge quilt. It would be a team effort. And there was one individual, and he was there, and his job was just to look at the quilt. He would step back and move forward and step back and move forward. And his job was to find where somebody made a mistake, where there was something that was, someone did a wrong stitch or something, because they would sew these, or I don't know what would be the right term, but they'd put these all together. I'm going to say sewing because I don't know much of quilting. Would that be quilting? Maybe. They would quilt it together. And his job was to fix different things that people would do as they would put these different pieces together. And his job was to take things that were mistakes and would be flaws and to correct them, to take it and make it look like either you wouldn't notice it, or to make it into a pattern so that it would look like it was part of the quilt and part of a pattern, as if it was planned. In other words, his job was to take something that would normally be seen as a mistake and make it purposeful. And that reminds me of something we often don't think about. There's an actual, in theology, a doctrine called doctrine of concurrence. I'm sure you probably never heard of it, but what the doctrine of concurrence says is that God can use even sinful acts to bring himself glory. One example of that is when we saw in the life of Joseph. Joseph, his brothers cast him into slavery, and he ends up saying at the end of, after his father dies, that they meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And this is something that we often don't see. We don't think about the fact that there's bad things that happen in life, and yet God can turn those things that we would see as bad and flaws and mistakes, and he could turn them for good, for his glory. One of the biggest things is that we sin. Basically, those are mistakes. Those are criminal acts we make against a God, which doesn't sound too good, but he can make that into glory. And the way he did that was that God himself came to earth. He died on a cross that we could be set free. God himself paid the fine that you and I owe, that we could be forgiven. We did bad things, the mistakes, and trust me, sin is far more than just a mistake. It's bad. We're breaking God's law, but he could turn that around into something good and glorifying. And so, as we look at a quilt, though it takes many pieces of different, in that example, different people putting it to work, it came out with one quilt, one product. The reality is you and I have many things in life that form us and make us into who we are. Even those bad things in life that we want to avoid, we can look at that and just try to rebel against it, or we can accept that God can use this to bring good in our life and to teach us things. And even the harmful things could be used to bring God glory. That's how I would transition from a quilt to the gospel. Maybe not as good as you would have, but how would you go about doing that? Give it a shot. Let us know how you would transition from a quilt to the gospel.